The White Sox are building a new field. All it needs is to have a stadium structure built around it. Let's discuss the club's attempt to get a new stadium, along with the dark cloud of a potential move to another city if the team does not get one, with my guest next on Locked On White Sox.
You are Locked On White Sox, your daily Chicago White Sox podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, I'm your host, Todd Welter, a lifelong Sox fan and the site expert at Southside Showdown, part of the Fansided Network. You can check out my written content at SouthsideShowdown.com, and also I've covered Major League Baseball for outlets such as the Associated Press. And thanks for making Locked On White Sox your first listen every day. We are free and available wherever you get your podcasts and on YouTube, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Make sure to hit the like button on today's episode and subscribe to the YouTube channel at Locked On White Sox if you've not done so already. And can't catch the show on YouTube? You can also catch it via podcast on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. And today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONMLB for $20 off your first purchase. All right, the latest stunt the White Sox are doing in an attempt to get a new stadium is putting a baseball field on the proposed plot of land the club wants to build a new stadium on. Joining me to discuss the club's attempt to get a new ballpark, the dark cloud of a possible relocation if one is not obtained, and the dark cloud just hanging over the franchise in general, is WBBM News Radio's midday anchor and noon business hour host, and one of the biggest White Sox fans I have ever met, Rob Hart. And Rob, what in the world are the White Sox doing by putting a baseball field on the empty plot of land on the 78?
Well, I don't think it's necessarily the White Sox that are doing that. I mean, obviously they are part of this, but Related Midwest, which actually owns the land that makes up the 78 in the South Loop. They want to demonstrate to the state of Illinois and to anyone else who is interested in listening that a baseball field could be built there and that it would look good. And I think there's a little bit of very appropriate. We're having this conversation today, the day after James Earl Jones passed away. There's a little bit of if you build it, maybe they will come, or the state of Illinois will cough up some money. Kevin Warren, the president of the Chicago Bears, mentioned last week that the Bears would be more than open to teaming up with the White Sox to get some kind of package deal for public financing for both a lakefront stadium for the Bears and a South Loop facility for the Chicago White Sox. Now, the thought that I had when I saw the diamond come in is like, maybe this is kind of like a backdoor way of just building the stadium piece by piece. You just put the field down, and then maybe you put some a ballpark structure in there, and then maybe you build a clubhouse. But the one thing that makes the 78, I mean, it looks great in the renderings, but the one thing that makes the 78 extremely costly compared to, let's say, 35th and Shields is that there's no real infrastructure around it. As a matter of fact, the city of Chicago offered that particular parcel of land to the White Sox in the 80s. And Jerry Reinsdorf and the ownership group said no, because even though the city was giving the land basically for free, they did not want to pay to attach water and sewer facilities and a CTA stop, all of which were they would have to build themselves, because what makes that parcel of land different than other parts of the South Loop is that that was railroad land, essentially on its own for a very long time. In fact, it was the used to be the coach yard for a long lost train station, Grand Central Station, which was closed in 1969. And that land was owned or used by the Baltimore and Ohio and the Chesapeake and Ohio Railroad. And when the passenger business started to fade and the train station was closed, that land was essentially abandoned because there was nothing on it but tracks. You had to put in water and sewer and electricity, and no developer from 1969 onward wanted to pay out of their own pocket. And that is where we are with the White Sox in 2024 going on 2025. They don't want to pay out of their own pocket to build all of that infrastructure to service a ballpark, and they're hoping that the city of Chicago and the developer and the state of Illinois would team up to not only create land that would have value and essentially be taxable, but also because they've already proven there's proof of concept. They managed to get a publicly funded ballpark once, nearly 40 years ago. Why not ask again?
So does this ballpark ever get built while Jerry Reinsdorf is still the owner, or would it take new ownership willing to pony up more private money? Because from what I keep hearing, the state's saying, no, we're not going to give you the money.
And nor should they, because we're in a situation here in Illinois, and I think in a lot of other states, you have the end of the COVID relief money that balanced a lot of budgets from sea to shining sea. And just as we're seeing in the city of Chicago with a budget deficit projected for next year, combined with a budget deficit for the rest of this year of well north of $1 billion. And then, the state of Illinois having to make some very hard choices too, once that federal COVID relief money runs out. The appetite by lawmakers to provide a multi-billion-dollar subsidy to the Bears and to the White Sox, it's a non-starter. I think most state lawmakers have said that. They're pretty pictures. It would be very nice to see. But I think other cities have demonstrated that you can build a stadium with private funds, and the earth doesn't fly off its axis. I mean, for example, the LA Rams, their stadium, which was built on a former racetrack in LA, is that's entirely privately funded. And we're talking about entities that are worth well over $1 billion. And if you wanted to bring in partners who could pay out of their own pocket, I think everyone would be happy to see a new stadium. But if the taxpayer is on the hook, especially now, it's not going to happen.
And it doesn't even sound like a public-private partnership like what happened with the Milwaukee Bucks, where the owners put up at least $250 million, about half of the cost at the time. This sounds like, Jerry's like, well, I'll give you $200 million. That doesn't even sound like it's a public-private partnership, right?
Well, it's yeah. I think the $200 million is, we're talking about a $2 billion project. I mean, that's the stadium and building the neighborhood around it. And either the White Sox ownership group and Jerry, they find some way to meet the state in the middle, or just find out that, or just meekly accept the fact that they're not going to get any more ISFA funding, especially now. And or this will just continue until after Jerry or his heirs decide to sell the team to somebody else, and they solve the problem one way or another.
All right. And you had a great tweet when Jerry had the meeting with the Nashville's mayor, as a move out of Chicago would diminish the franchise's value. Can you please explain why it would make sense for the Sox to stay in Chicago, even if they have to compete with the Cubs for the market?
Well, because the Chicago metropolitan area is still 8 million people, even in an era of plummeting cable TV package value. The White Sox still make a nice chunk of change from their cable TV partnerships, and Major League Baseball makes a lot of money from having two teams in a very big city. And even now, and I think I don't want to say anything about next year, because a year ago I said, how can it get worse? And it managed to get worse. But I think we're in a situation here where even in this, at this moment in time, where the White Sox are struggling to win 35 games, 36 games, the Chicago White Sox today would be more valuable than a Nashville White Sox or a Portland White Sox or a Charlotte White Sox. So I think a lot of the value of the team is wrapped up in being in a big city. Now that could be the jumping off point to another discussion, which I think has probably been had ad nauseum by many other people, is being a team in a big city. Have the White Sox made the most of this opportunity since 1981? And I think we could say the answer there is a resounding no. but maybe a new ownership group would see a lot of potential there. Whereas I think at this point, I think the ownership group kind of just doesn't see them doing much more with the franchise than what they've been able to accomplish so far.
All right, well, we're going to after the break, we're going to shift to the bad baseball product that plays at Guaranteed Rate Field, and let's get the perspective of one of the most diehard Sox fans I know, and Rob Hart, next on Locked On White Sox. The White Sox season is wrapping up, but the Bears have just started. The Blackhawks and the Bulls regular season is just around the corner. Hawks and Bears games are always fun to go to live, and if you want to check out a game in person, use the Game Time app. Game Time has a new feature called Game Time Picks that makes getting tickets for your favorite live event even easier. Game Time Picks filters out the fluff to show you only incredible deals on great seats so you don't have to waste time searching through thousands of tickets. Game Time Picks makes it easier to save more on sports, concerts, comedy, theater, etc. You want an example? Game Time had a 50% off deal when the Dodgers took on the Diamondbacks this past Labor Day. The lowest price guarantee or Game Time will credit you 110% of the difference. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONMLB for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDMLB for $20 off. Download Game Time today, because what time is it? Game time. And thank you for making Locked On White Sox your first listen today. For your second listen, enjoy the Locked On MLB podcast. Host Paul Sullivan, a.k.a. Sully, is here daily to provide national expertise with his trademark humor to help you get ready for the MLB playoffs. Prepare for the Fall Classic with Sully, who has it covered every single day on Locked On MLB, available on YouTube or wherever you get your podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And the White Sox wrap up a 3-game home series with the Cleveland Guardians today. The first pitch is at 1:10 p.m. Central Standard Time. Catch every pitch of the White Sox hometown broadcast with SiriusXM on the SXM app. And welcome back into Locked On White Sox. I'm your host, Todd Welter. Make sure to hit the like button on today's episode and subscribe to the YouTube channel at Locked On White Sox if you've not done so already. And if you can't catch the show on YouTube, follow or subscribe to the show on wherever you get your podcasts, as Locked On White Sox is available via audio on places such as Apple and Spotify. And I'm here with WBBM's Rob Hart, a lifelong dedicated Sox fan. I think you're more of a diehard Sox fan than practically anybody I've ever met. That includes Beefloaf and the 108 guys. And Rob, how do you describe this terrible season if you're ever asked by friends and family?
Well, I think you mentioned some other notable White Sox fans on social media, but I will say to their credit, they are regular White Sox game attendees. I have not been to a White Sox game since July of 2022. And, part of that is just, having 3 very busy girls at home doing a lot of different activities that takes up nearly all of my time these days. And the other part of it is the Kennedy Expressway construction project that's taking place in Chicago, a 3-year project that makes it very difficult to get from the northwest suburbs into the city, even at lightly traveled times of the day. So the question I asked myself last year and this year is this product worth sitting in a car for 90 minutes to get to Guaranteed Rate Field to take it a baseball game myself? And the answer thus far has been a resounding no. I will say, though, my kids have gone to more White Sox games in the past 2 years than I have. I mean, it's just very difficult to watch. It's just very embarrassing as a fan. The team is now firmly in national joke territory. I mean, the Onion is writing articles, and how many different sports content churn social media accounts posted that picture of the empty ballpark, literally empty ballpark, during that suspended that the resumption of that suspended game against Texas a couple of weeks ago. I mean, I was cautiously optimistic going into this season because there were some moves that Chris Getz made that were intriguing. Inviting all those players into camp in March just to see who could compete for roster spots, and maybe you could find some diamonds in the rough. I really like that idea. I like the idea of no roster spot was guaranteed. And then practically everything that could have gone wrong did go wrong. You had, Moncada and Eloy injured right off the bat. Inconsistency from Luis Robert Jr. I do think, even now, Brian Bannister's pitching lab is interesting. I mean, there were some real success stories. Eric Fetty turning into a player and being traded and getting some value in return, and that's just for a guy you got out of Korea. And Garrett Crochet turning into something. Obviously. He's been a little more inconsistent over the past month or so, just because of the fact that he's probably pitched the most as a professional than ever before. So I guess you can grade him as incomplete, but everything else has been a disaster. And I don't know how much of that was Pedro. I don't know how much of that was you just did not know how to identify talent from the minor league levels up through the big league club. And one could make the argument that if the bullpen was any good at holding leads, that maybe we're talking about a team that's, maybe would lose 95 games, which is still bad. It would have represented an improvement from last year. But, now we're talking about an entire roster of players who hopefully will be answers in a trivia contest many decades from now. But there's really nothing I think the White Sox organization has done from the general manager on down, outside of hiring Brian Bannister, and we'll see who he brings in as the director of overseas scouting, replacing Marco Patti. We'll see what coaching and organizational moves he makes in the offseason, if he's able to make them. But there's really not, as much as I gave him the benefit of the doubt, and I was on the more positive end of the ledger coming into this season, there's really, you could easily replace him with anybody. You could pull people out of Section 108, and maybe you would actually have, you would find more success that way. And it's just going to get tougher, because I think the one thing that really jumps out at me, and this was looking at the Andrew Benintendi deal, which was the richest contract ever handed out by the White Sox in the history of the franchise, and that's just the cost of doing business these days. Guys like Andrew Benintendi, who in the right hands, who are solid players, not spectacular but good enough. That's a $75 million player these days in 2024 and 2025. And unless you're willing to spend that kind of money just to get dudes, it's going to be a lot of rummaging through the remainder pile. And that used to work very well for Kenny Williams and Rick Hahn 20 years ago. But one thing that I think is very obvious to everybody is that teams are a lot more savvy about talent, and they're not giving away Jose Contreras anymore. They're not giving away Carlos Quinton. They're not giving away Freddie Garcia. They hold on to those players. And so that whole system they had that I think worked really well, which was just, get some guys that teams had given up on. They're not abandoned anymore. They're developed. And so the players that do get to the White Sox are in need of a lot of work. And I don't think this organization has the talent to give them the work that they need.
You had a great tweet a couple days ago regarding the Fox National TV broadcast, going over some other historically terrible teams like, the 1916 Philadelphia A's or the 1935 Boston Braves. The gist of your tweet was GM Chris Getz had every possible tool to construct at least a decent roster, while those clubs did not. So how much does that amplify the sorry state of this franchise?
Well, I think that makes it even worse. I mean, obviously, you play baseball for 125 years, you play a lot of games, and eventually you see something you never see before. And we're witnessing that right now on the south side of Chicago, unfortunately. And the 1962 Mets, and there was a very good story in the Wall Street Journal a couple of weeks ago about the surviving members of that team which lost a member this week in Ed Cranepool, who was quoted in that article, who said that he's more than happy to have the White Sox take that distinction away from them. But their excuse was it was an expansion team. This was a team that was put together. They were playing in the Polo Grounds. Casey Stengel was the manager, and it was more or less a PR and marketing effort for a New York baseball market that lost two teams that people loved and had a very close affinity with, in the Brooklyn Dodgers and the New York Giants, when they both moved to California. So it was just like, hey, the Mets are here. They're terrible, but let's wrap our arms around them. And hey, there's the old professor, and there was a lot to like about it, even though the team was historically awful. And I think that became part of their personality. The Miracle Mets, the Amazing Mets. I mean, that was all sarcastic before it became real in 1969. And then, but yeah, the other teams, the Boston Braves, 1935, you had an owner that was under financial pressure and sold off all the good players. I think the same thing happened in 1916 with Connie Mack and the A's in Philadelphia. But that you shouldn't do that today. That's impossible today. You have all of this science available to you, either statistics, biomechanical engineering, imaging, launch angles, bat speed, all of these things that were just not available to these other teams, and you managed to be worse than all of them. If you're a professional baseball player today, that's your job. That's your life. The players who were playing in 1916 or in 1935, season's over. They're back on the farm, or they're working at a factory, or they're drafted in the Army.
Or they're working in a factory before the ball game.
Yeah. I mean, being a baseball player was a part-time job back then. And it's the fact that you fail on this level is inexcusable. And even then, you traveled around the country by train. Road trips are like 5 games in one city, 5 games in another, and then you're back for a month. Like it boggles the mind that you can have a team again, I say this again, in 2024 with all the resources available to it, and you're going to be worse than teams like full of guys who caught diseases during World War I.
All right. One thing I want to do with guests who come on the show is find out who they think should be the next manager of the White Sox. So let's get Rob's choice, or if he doesn't have one, at least see what he thinks the Sox should be looking for in the manager next on Locked On White Sox. All right, PrizePicks is America's #1 daily fantasy sports app with over 5 million active members. PrizePicks is the easiest and most exciting way to play daily fantasy sports. Unlike the other apps on PrizePicks, it's just you against the numbers. All you do is pick more or less on 2 to 6 player stat projections and watch the winnings roll in. One Caleb Williams passing yard gets you 1 win on PrizePicks every week in September. That's right, only 1 yard gets you an automatic win every football weekend in September. So now you got 3 weeks of free W's. Don't miss this deal on PrizePicks because it's gone when September ends. And PrizePicks is the best way to get action on sports in most states, including Illinois, Indiana, and Wisconsin. I've told you about my buddy who lives behind the cheddar curtain, so he uses PrizePicks to get his picks in and loves it because of how easy it is to play. And DJ Moore's more or less at receiving yards is 57.5, so maybe that's the pick you want to go with to pair up with the Caleb Williams deal. Download the PrizePicks app today and use code LOCKEDONMLB and get $50 off instantly when you play $5. That's code LOCKEDONMLB on PrizePicks to get $50 instantly when you play $5. You don't even need to win to receive the $50 bonus. It's guaranteed. PrizePicks, run your game. And the White Sox wrap up a 3-game home series with the Cleveland Guardians today. The first pitch is at 1:10 p.m. Central Standard Time. Catch every pitch of the White Sox hometown broadcast with SiriusXM on the SXM app. Search White Sox. Welcome back into Locked On White Sox. I am your host, Todd Welter, here with Rob Hart from WBBM. Rob, we've actually made it through 2 segments where two Marquette alums have not talked about Marquette basketball, haven't shared any stories about, being on campus. I think that's an accomplishment right now.
We are laser focused.
Yeah.
We have
terrible
much bigger problems to solve.
Like how bad the White Sox are. And Rob, who'd you like to see be the next White Sox manager?
I mean, I don't, whoever this person is, it's going to be a really big job. Because once again, I don't know what this manager is going to have to deal with. Is he going to even have a Garrett Crochet? Is he going to even have a Luis Robert? And again, I would love to be wrong, but I would say, given the fact that those two players are probably traded, and if they are, again, it'll be they would be more likely to win 25 games next year, more so than 50. I mean, I think that's the talent deficit that we're looking at here. So I think before you talk about a manager, you talk about who's going to be running the team, who is going to be making personnel decisions, and then you have a new manager that wants to get that first MLB job and try to develop a culture and a clubhouse, and because I think the hardest part, I think and I'm guessing it consumed Pedro, and it's just probably just difficult to go to work under those conditions every day when you're just going to get your brains beat in. I mean, look at Michael Kopech's friends and family on social media. I mean, they're thrilled that he's in LA and on a winning team and has a showcase for his talent, and is no longer in a place where he was, struggling and having a really hard time and, trying to prove himself as being a major piece of a major trade a long time ago. I'm guessing that's probably very mentally taxing. The same thing with Eloy in Baltimore. I don't know about, I can't speak to Tommy Pham's St. Louis Cardinals experience, but I know he was getting it done when he was traded to St. Louis a couple of months ago. So whoever the manager is, they're going to be walking into a situation where you got to keep people's spirits up and engaged and into it and having fun. And yeah, if you're winning 35 games April 1st through October 1st, that's tough. So I think whoever the manager is, they're going to have to really kind of build a clubhouse and build an environment where you're feeling good when you come to the office every day. That's the first thing. I mean, I've seen the rumors that everybody else has seen, that maybe Terry Francona would be interested. And, given Jerry's penchant for approving people that he knows, that would be intriguing. But I think he would also have to be really empowered to make roster decisions and, tell Chris Getz what to do.
All right. Well, that wraps up this edition of Locked On White Sox. Thank you for making Locked On White Sox your first listen today. Now go check out the Locked On MLB podcast. Prepare for the Fall Classic with Sully, who has it covered every single day. You can find the link to Locked On MLB in the description, so you don't need to search. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'll be back tomorrow with a Throwback Thursday moment. Since I didn't have a retro segment last week, I'm thinking let's tackle how good that 1994 club was and how it was a travesty the strike wiped out the World Series that they should have won. Feel free to leave comments about my chat with Rob Hart. And Rob, thank you again for joining me. You're obviously one of the best people I've ever met in my entire life. And you're always somebody that I've looked up to. So I really, really appreciate that you've joined me today. So I really appreciate
thank you. And you know what I say to that? You should meet more people. Thank you so much. And speaking of 1994, why couldn't we have a strike wipe out this season?
Yeah, my point exactly. Like, why?
Could you just imagine what would have happened if this season ended on August 12th? I mean, it's like it would be a sweet release, but instead we have to see this one to the bitter end.
Yes. However, then I wouldn't have a podcast that I get, at least a little bit of side money on. Again, you can leave any comments on the episode page on YouTube, X formerly Twitter at Todd J Dub or at Locked On Sox. Email me at lockedonwhitesox@gmail.com. Have a great day. I'll see you tomorrow.